Okay, we are live on YouTube.
Great, thank you.
So I will copy the link to you in Slack. Okay, we are live on YouTube.
Great, thank you.
So I will copy the link to you in Slack. Okay. And now I will sign off and it should keep going.
Okay, great. Can you promote me just in case?
Oh yeah.
It doesn't do it automatically.
More, make host.
Perfect, thank you.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.
Hi, Gunnar.
Hey, William.
How are you? How are you today?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
What's your number, you guess, that will sign on today?
Oh, 600.
Yeah. I always wonder what happened to that other half.
I know.
Those are the people that go through the buffet line and put way more on their plate than they actually eat.
Yeah, just in case.
Yeah. Let me see how lucky I am with. Oh, can you let me share my screen?
Oh, yeah. Whoops. Okay, there you go.
Thanks. Where's my cursor? Oh, there it is. Did I get it right?
Yep, looks great.
Wow, I did it right. I don't know how.
Well, good job.
Okay, except I don't really want to do it yet. Okay. Have you ever tried to watch one of these through YouTube Live?
I have it pulled up, but it's not much different. There's just about 10 seconds behind.
Huh, okay. I was just wondering if, and the captioning still works or no?
Yep, there's captioning.
Oh, that's great. Okay. I wish there was a way to mute myself on the keyboard rather than to have to get my cursor over to that part on the menu.
You can do Alt A.
Really?
Yep, you just hover over mute and it tells you that.
Alt? Oh, but wait, what's Alt?
Yeah, I don't know what it is on a Mac. But if, yeah, just hover your mouse over the microphone and it'll tell you the shortcut.
It doesn't. I see. Oh, that's good. Okay, so it's Command Shift A.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, that's really good to know. Because sometimes I have trouble getting that menu bar to wake up.
Yes.
Yes, Shannon, this is the live class that will be starting in about 40 minutes. That's 1 o'clock Central Time, if that's what you're asking. Gunnar, do you see that our captioner is on?
Yep, I'm working with them right now.
Paula, thank you for being our captioner today. This is Will Iserman. I am one of the presenters today.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Somebody will need to assign me as captioner so I get the API token.
Yep,
Ah,
you should be assigned.
There we go. Perfect. All right, thank you. And just as a warning, it is super windy here today. We're under a wind advisory. If I get kicked off, well, I shouldn't, but if I do, it'll take me just a minute to hook back in.
Sure.
So just be forewarned. We had a flicker about 5 minutes ago, and I'm like, no, not right now.
Oh, we understand. It's
So,
totally understandable. Thanks for letting us know, though.
all right, I'm going to finish getting set up here.
Did you get a copy of today's PowerPoint?
I did.
Okay, so you saw some of the technical terms we're going to be using.
Yep, I already got them in my dictionary.
Okay,
So,
great. Good deal.
all right, thank you.
Thank you. For those of you who have signed on early, you're in the right place. You're just early, which is great. We'll be starting in about a half an hour at the top of the hour. So do whatever you need to do between now and then. I'll be checking in periodically as more people sign on. For those of you who have signed on early, you're in the right place for today's webinar that will be starting at the top of the hour in about 15 minutes. Terry, do you want to do an audio check?
Yes, good afternoon. This is Terry. How does that sound, William?
Sounds good.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Gunnar, how did I do?
You did well. Looks great.
Awesome. We want to welcome everybody who is signing in right now. We're just getting ready to get started for today's webinar, which is entitled Evidence-Based Hearing Screening and Evaluation Practices for Children Age Birth to 5, Useful Facts and Practical Tools. We'll be starting at the top of the hour in about 5 minutes. For now, you can just get your volume adjusted to your liking. We have many people registered for today's webinar, so we ask you to refrain from using the chat and Q&A fields for now. We will, however, be opening up the floor to questions after we've completed our remarks for today. So you will be able to have an opportunity to ask any questions you might have at that point. Today's webinar is being brought to you by the National Center for Hearing Assessment and Management at Utah State University, which serves as the National Technical Resource Center on Early Hearing Detection and Intervention, the acronym of which is the EDI-NTRC. I am talking now mostly for the benefit of those who are signing on and needing to adjust their volume. Today's webinar is going to be recorded and then subsequently posted on our website at infanthearing.org as well as kidshearing.org. So if anything disrupts your full attention today, or if you think of people who might benefit from today's webinar who are not attending live with us today, this webinar will be able to be viewed whenever you'd like on our websites. Again, that's infanthearing.org or the early childhood portion of that website, which you can go to directly by typing in kidshearing.org. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. Pardon my repeating myself, but we have people signing on a very rapid pace right now. So I'm going to just continue to talk so that everybody has a chance to get their volumes adjusted to their liking. We haven't started yet, but we're getting ready to. You're in the right place for today's webinar, entitled Evidence-Based Hearing Screening and Evaluation Practices for Children Age Birth to 5, Useful Facts and Practical Tools. We'll be starting in just a few minutes here. As I mentioned a moment ago, today's webinar is going to be recorded and then subsequently posted on our websites, which are infanthearing.org. Or if you want to go directly to the early childhood portion of that website, you can just type in kidshearing.org and you'll find the webinar recording there as well, along with a variety of other resources that we'll be talking about today pertaining to early childhood screening and follow-up practices. Lots of practical tools you'll be able to find there and download and put to use. We were delighted to see that we had well over 1,500 people register for today's webinar. So that's always so gratifying for us to know that the work that we do is of significance and relevance to so many people who work with children across the country. We're going to give it another minute and then we're going to get started. Be aware that at the end of today's webinar, there will be an opportunity to give us a short evaluation. And once you do that, it will generate a certificate of attendance for your participation in today's webinar. So if that is of use to you, be sure to not sign off before we've displayed that link so that you're able to get your certificate. And of course, give us feedback on today's webinar as well. We have people signing on pretty rapidly here, so I'm going to give it a couple minutes and then we're going to start. For those of you who have just signed on, you're in the right place. We're going to start here in just a moment. Our webinar title for today is Evidence-Based Hearing Screening and Evaluation Practices for Children aged birth to 5. Useful facts and practical tools. Terry, are you set to get started with me here in a moment? Gunnar, are you hearing me okay?
Yep, I hear you fine. I did not hear Terry if you spoke.
I didn't hear Terry either. Terry, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, why don't we get started? Great. Well, welcome everybody to our webinar today entitled Evidence-Based Hearing Screening and Evaluation Practices for Children aged birth to 5, Useful Facts and Practical Tools. My name is Will Eiserman, and I am the director of the National Center for Hearing, or the associate director of the National Center for Hearing Assessment and Management at Utah State University. And I'm joined today by Dr. Terry Faust, who is a pediatric audiologist and a speech language pathologist who has served as a consultant and a trainer with the ECHO Initiative since its very beginning. The ECHO Initiative is the Early Childhood Outreach Initiative, which has been in place since the early 2000s, providing support to early Head Start and Head Start programs in the development and implementation of evidence-based hearing screening and follow-up practices. Now, before I have Terry introduce himself, I want to let you all know that today's webinar is being recorded and will subsequently be posted on our websites at infanthearing.org. And if you want to go directly to the early childhood portion of that website, you can just type in kidshearing.org, where you'll find the recording of today's webinar, along with a variety of other useful resources that we'll be talking about today. I want to give a shout out to our captioner today. Thank you for your time and talents in helping us make this as accessible as possible today. And I want everybody to know that at the end of today's webinar, we will be doing a short little evaluation. And at the end of that, it will generate a certificate of attendance so that if you need to document your attendance to today's webinar, you will be able to do that at the completion of the webinar today by completing the evaluation. So, We are going to ask you to hold your questions until we open up the floor for questions, and then we'll gladly engage with you about whatever comes up. Jot down your thoughts that might stimulate a question. Maybe we'll anticipate the question and we'll answer it before you even have to ask it. So we'll see how that goes. So Terry Faust, as I said, is with me today. He's a pediatric audiologist and a speech language pathologist who has worked with us for over 20 years. Terry, welcome.
Thank you, William. Yeah, it has been over 20 years. It's been a while, but it's been great work. And William and I, along with other ECHO team staff, as well as many local collaborators, have provided training in almost every state with thousands of staff from early Head Start, American Indian, Alaska Native, and migrant Head Start programs, as well as other early care and education programs over these years. And we are always encouraged, just like we are today, by the huge amount of interest that there is in establishing evidence-based hearing screening programs so that children with hearing-related needs can be identified and be served.
Thank you, Terry. And once again, we're going to ask you all to hold your questions until we wrap up our comments. We can't simultaneously do that and present all the content that we have prepared for all of you today. So if you don't mind, that would be useful. So the work of the ECHO Initiative is based on the recognition that each day there are young children who are deaf or hard of hearing being served in early childhood education and healthcare settings, often without their hearing-related needs being known. Hearing loss is often called the invisible disability. It is an invisible condition. So how can we reliably identify which children have normal hearing and which may not?
Well, the short answer to that question, William, is that early care and education providers can be trained to conduct evidence-based hearing screening, just like you see depicted in these pictures here in these photos. Now, the ultimate outcome of a hearing screening program is that we can identify children who are deaf or hard of hearing who have not been previously identified. In the procedure that you see on the left of your screen, that is called otoacoustic emissions, or shortened to just OAE hearing screening. And that's the recommended method for children birth to 3 years of age. And it's also increasingly recommended and used for children 3 to 5 years of age as well. Now on the right, you'll see the procedure pure tone audiometry hearing screening. And that's historically been the most commonly used screening method for children 3 years of age and older. And you'll still see that in many early care and education settings and providers using it. And we'll be talking about both of these methods today.
So let me give you a quick overview of what we want to cover today. While this presentation is not a training, our goal is to provide an overview of the big picture of what is involved in implementing evidence-based hearing screening for children across the age spectrum, birth to 5 years of age. We'll start by giving you an overview of the auditory system or the hearing system, which will help lay a foundation for understanding how the hearing screening methods we'll be talking about today actually work. Then we'll talk about why we screen for hearing loss. What even makes it possible for us to be able to seriously engage in systematic screening for hearing. We'll then talk about the two methods that Terry just mentioned, OAE and pure tone audiometry, starting with an overview of the OAE screening process, followed by an overview of the pure tone audiometry screening process. Next, we'll address the important question, what do we do next when a child doesn't pass a screening? We'll summarize the follow-up steps that are undertaken when a child doesn't pass a hearing screening on one or both ears, so you have an idea of what that part of the process looks like, because actually that's probably the most important part of the process. We're going to wrap up by showing you how to access some resources to support the process of developing and maintaining your evidence-based hearing screening program, and then address whatever questions you might have. So have your questions ready for when we get to that part. So that's where we're headed. And you'll follow our progression through these topics by referring to the left side of your screen that you see over there. And since this is a recorded webinar, this left side menu can be useful if you return to this recording and want to navigate to a specific portion of it to review again or to share with others. So keep that in mind. And once again, the recording of this webinar will be found on infanthearing.org or kidshearing.org, which is a subsection of infanthearing.org that focuses on early childhood. There you see it right there. Now, before we launch into our content, I want to make sure you all know where to go after today's webinar to get additional resources, information, and access to training. You'll hear us say this several times today. Implementing evidence-based hearing screening practices is more than just using a designated piece of equipment or specific method. To implement evidence-based practice, which we presume most of you, if not all of you, have as your goal, that equipment or method must be used according to a prescribed set of steps under carefully controlled conditions, each step of which is carefully documented in detail. This is true whether you're using OAE screening or pure tone screening. Over the years, the Early Childhood Hearing Outreach Initiative, known as the ECHO Initiative, developed a wide range of resources to help you achieve the goal of implementing evidence-based hearing screening. And our goal for today is primarily to help you find all of that information and the resources you need. So let's make sure right off the bat that you know where to go, why you're going to go there, and what you're going to find. So let's take a look at our website, kidshearing.org. We invite you to feel free to use all of these implementation tools. And certainly before you sit down to write a letter to parents about your screening efforts, or a referral letter, or to develop a form for documenting your results, check out what we have at kidshearing.org, because you'll likely find it right there already developed. Our goal over the last 20 plus years was to create all of those things so that you wouldn't have to make them yourselves. Many of the resources you'll find there are the result of various examples, early childhood programs shared with us. So you can be assured that others have used the language and the format of many of these resources to achieve the same goals that you have. We also want you to know that many of you want to know how to access training. So be assured that we can direct you to a specific location where you can get the training you need, a location on our website. So let me give you a quick look at the resources, but again, take time after the webinar to get acquainted with these resources. This is the landing page you fall on when you go to kidshearing.org, which provides a wide array of practical resources and tools to help you implement evidence-based hearing screening. The first part of the page places early childhood screening in the larger context of identifying children who are deaf or hard of hearing, expanding the traditional focus of newborn screening to include a focus on identifying hearing loss throughout early childhood. If we scroll down, this is where you'll find all of the practical resources most relevant to early childhood screening, starting with planning resources. So you'll see the planning resources here. In the next part of it, you'll see where to access training. So as we said, for nearly 20 years, the ECHO Initiative was funded to provide in-person and virtual comprehensive training That complete process, training process, is now available anytime you and your staff need it. And we know that many of you are needing to know how to get training for hearing screening. When you click on either OAE or Pure Tone Audiometry training, you'll be taken to a separate NCHAM non-federally funded website, learntoscreen.org. And this website is where you can access the training that you're needing to prepare early care and education providers in evidence-based hearing screening practices for young children. Some of you may have a group of staff who are needing training at the same time, while some of you may find you have a single staff member entering your program at different times and needing training at different points throughout the year. So the online training available here can be done at any time and at any pace. So it should meet the needs of just about anyone who is needing quality, comprehensive training on either OAE or Pure Tone Audiometry hearing screening practices. So we encourage you to check that out after we complete our webinar today. The next set of the resources here are screening resources, and we'll be talking about those. These are practical tools for getting ready to screen, the protocol guide and documentation forms, referral letters, all sorts of daily practice things that you need to run a screening program. And then there's follow-up resources, a tracking tool, which is really helpful in tracking a group of children through the screening and follow-up process, as well as some monitoring the quality of your program tools to make sure that you are staying within what is evidence-based practice. So again, kidshearing.org is where you want to go after today's webinar. You know, if you don't remember anything else we say today, remember this, because everything we're covering, you'll find again right there. So let's put all of those resources into context. We'll start by giving you a quick overview of the auditory system, or really, in layman's terms, the hearing system. There are three main parts to the auditory system: the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear, or cochlea. When sound enters the outer ear, it causes the eardrum to vibrate, which then moves three small bones in the middle ear. This movement stimulates thousands of tiny sensitive hair cells in the snail-shaped portion of the inner ear called the cochlea. From the inner ear, the sound signal is carried along special nerves to the hearing centers of the brain, and the individual experiences the sensation that we call sound.
And William, while this is how the auditory system typically functions, there can be some exceptions. There can be temporary issues, such as a wax blockage, or there can be fluid in the middle ear that's caused by ear infections that we may discover and get addressed during a hearing screening process. But the primary target condition of our hearing screenings is the functioning of that inner ear, or cochlea, that snail-shaped portion of the ear you see here on your screen. Now, in some instances, the sound travels through the outer and the middle ear, but when it reaches the cochlea, the signal is not transmitted to the brain, resulting in what we call a sensory neural loss. And this condition is usually permanent. And this is the primary condition for which we are screening in our mass screening efforts. Now, this may come as a surprise to you, but it's an important fact for all of us to know and understand, and that is that sensory neural hearing loss is the most common birth defect in the United States. In fact, about 3 children in every 1,000 are born with a hearing loss, deaf or hard of hearing. Now, most newborns in the US are now screened for hearing loss using evidence-based methods, most even before they leave the hospital. But screening in the newborn period isn't enough. Research suggests that the incidence of permanent hearing loss doubles between birth and school age. So from that 3 in 1,000 at birth to about 6 in 1,000 by the time children enter school. So you can see we can't only screen for hearing loss at birth. We need to screen throughout early childhood because hearing loss can occur at any time as a result of illness, physical trauma, or environmental or genetic factors. This kind of hearing loss is often referred to as late onset hearing loss, and that just simply means that it's acquired after the newborn period.
You know, it's commonly understood that language development is at the heart of cognitive and social emotional development and school readiness. This drives many of the practices we see in many early childhood settings. Think about how much emphasis is always placed on early language development, counting the words children can produce, etc. It's also important to note that hearing health is at the heart of typical language development, and that if we are going to be conscientious about promoting language development as a part of our commitment to school readiness, we should be equally conscientious about monitoring the status of hearing throughout this period. If hearing is compromised, then typical language will ultimately be compromised as well. And we don't want to wait for language delay to discover that a child has a hearing loss.
Exactly. This is why we see so much emphasis is being placed on monitoring the status of hearing in young children. Programs like Head Start, which for years have served as models of comprehensive health and educational programs for young children and their families, they've required hearing screenings for all of their children, even before we had the excellent methods we do now to do this. But what actually is screening? Screening can be thought of as kind of a sorting process. It helps us separate the children who are at risk of having a condition, in this case, hearing loss, from those who are far less likely to have the condition. Those in that first at-risk group are then followed with additional steps implemented by pediatric audiologists and healthcare providers to continue to refine that sorting process until we can definitively identify that small group of children that actually have a hearing loss. And to be blunt, we screen because we simply can't provide a comprehensive audiological evaluation on each and every child. Now, screening, when it's followed by appropriate audiological assessment and early intervention, can dramatically improve the options and the outcomes for children who are deaf and hard of hearing. So when a hearing loss is identified early, we can then make sure that that child has access to language. And as a result, children who are deaf or hard of hearing they're just really thriving in ways that used to be rare. And by providing that hearing screening, you then become part of the process of creating these really amazing and life-changing outcomes. So we want to take a moment here to look at several examples of children that have severe to profound hearing loss who've had the benefits of being identified early and quality intervention. These children are learning, thriving, and communicating.
So let's take a look at this. These two girls, they both have a severe hearing loss and are considered deaf. They have hearing aids.
This is water. She's putting on the water. You talk to me, I'll talk to you. And I will talk to you. And I will talk to you. And I will talk to you.
It's pretty cool how fluent they are in communicating with each other. Now, in these next example, these children are also deaf, and their parents have elected to use sign language as their primary mode of communication. Watch how well they're communicating with each other. And let me show you one more example. These boys are also deaf, and they're using cochlear implants to assist their communication.
Hey, I'm AJ. Hi, my name is Dipson. People are special in different ways. One of the things that makes me feel special is I'm deaf. I'm deaf too, and that means that your ears can't hear. AJ and I have special things to show you. They're called cochlear implants. They help us hear. Cochlear implant is a big word, so I call them CI. Hey,
Whoop. So we would like to show those children as a part of this conversation to remind us of our goal. We want to make sure that all children have access to language one way or another, regardless of whether they have a hearing loss. And, you know, half of the children that get identified through early childhood hearing screening have a mild hearing loss or a moderate hearing loss or a loss in just one ear. The other half has more significant hearing needs, regardless of how significant their hearing loss is. We need to make sure that they have full access to language, and that's our goal. And the way to achieve that is to be fully committed to quality periodic hearing screening.
As we mentioned a moment ago, OAE and pure tone audiometry are the recommended methods that we'll be talking about today. The availability of OAE and pure tone screening really means that it's no longer appropriate for us to rely solely on subjective methods that have been used in the past. Things such as ringing a bell behind a child's head, or depending solely on caregivers' perceptions about a child's hearing. Don't get me wrong, observations of a child's response to sound, especially a lack of response, can be helpful. And we should pay attention to how children do or do not respond to their environment. But these sorts of observations do not constitute a hearing screening because they're far too crude and unreliable. And frankly, we can do so much better, so much more than that because of our current available technology.
It's important to note that although some healthcare providers have incorporated evidence-based hearing screening into well-child visits, this is not yet standard practice, especially for children less than 4 years of age.
Yes, some parents may report with a lot of certainty that their healthcare provider did perform a hearing screening. But please understand this, and I really can't emphasize this enough. As an audiologist, routine examinations of ears by healthcare providers, so when they look in there with that ear light, that should not be mistaken as a hearing screening. It's really precisely because screening isn't yet happening consistently in that context that programs like yours are adopting hearing screening practices. Because obviously there's this increased recognition of the importance of monitoring hearing. And it's just now really feasible to do this in programs like yours and by people like you.
So the take-home message here is this: unless a child's health or medical records include clear documentation of a ear-specific hearing screening result and the screening method that was used, we should never assume a hearing screening has already been completed.
And William, another important point I think to remember is this, that while OAE and pure tone screening are highly reliable screening methods, they're not perfect. And that means that there could be some really rare conditions that are not identified through these screenings. There just isn't a perfect method. But so whenever a parent expresses concern about a child's hearing or language development, even if they received and passed a hearing screening using one of these methods, we still want to go ahead and refer that child for an evaluation by an audiologist.
That's right. So before we go on, let me say one more thing about newborn hearing screening results. When children enter your program or system, especially during the first year of life, always be sure to collect their newborn hearing screening results. If the results are anything other than a pass on both ears, you want to make sure that the follow-up evaluations have already occurred. And if you don't see evidence of that, you want to help the family circle back to their healthcare provider to accomplish that follow-up hearing evaluation. If you're in a program that requires an annual hearing screening, like many early Head Start programs, you can use the newborn hearing screening result for the first year of the child's life. But you'd want to rescreen after that because the hearing status of the child could have changed. And there's never a problem with screening them again within that first year. So keep that in mind. You can use the newborn hearing screening for up to the first year, but then you always want to rescreen annually after that. Okay, so now let's talk about these two hearing screening methods that are used during early childhood. If you're responsible for children who are under 3 years of age, the recommended method is OAE screening or otoacoustic emission screening, which you see on the left here. If you're responsible for screening children 3 years of age or older, historically, pure tone audiometry has been considered the recommended method for this age group. This is the headset screening where the child raises a hand or performs a specific task each time they hear a sound that's presented into one of the earphones. You see this method being used here on the right, and you've probably experienced this yourself at some point in your life.
Yeah, and I would just like to note here that there is growing recognition that for a variety of reasons, as common as the pure tone screening method has been, it may not always be the most feasible method to use with some of these younger children. The research shows that about 20 to 25% of children in the 3 to 5 age group can't be screened reliably with this methodology. And that's because they just aren't developmentally able to follow the directions and respond reliably. And that's really been our experience as well. So in those instances, OAE screening then is the preferred method for these children.
So what that means is at a minimum, if you're establishing evidence-based hearing screening practices for 3 to 5 year olds, and if you're considering or already using pure tone screening, you'll also need to be equipped and prepared to do OAEs on that 20 to 25% who can't be screened with pure tones. Or alternatively, you'll need to have a means for systematically referring all of those children to audiologists who can perform the screening. And to be frank, I don't think you're going to find too many audiologists who are going to be available and willing to do that many screenings of 20 to 25% of your children. So you've got to think about, if you're doing pure tone screening, what are you going to do about that 20 to 25% you can't screen? Because you can't just not screen them.
I think to simplify things, more and more audiologists are recommending the use of OAEs uniformly with all children 3 to 5 and older. It's quicker than pure tone screening, both to learn to do and actually implement. And it's far more likely to be a method that will work across the board with all children in that 3 to 5 year age group that you're screening, and it's equally as effective.
So if you or your program are still undecided about which method to use primarily for children in that 3 years and older group, we encourage you to carefully look at a document we have on our website at kidshearing.org that compares OAE screening and pure tone screening for this population. It'll help you kind of talk through and think through what you're going to do about that. But be assured of one thing, or encouraged about one thing, and that is you don't want to just not screen 20% of your children, because sometimes the children that are the most difficult to screen are the very ones that have a hearing loss. So be careful to have a backup plan for children you can't successfully screen. All right, Terry, let's talk about OAE screening.
Great. Okay, let's go ahead then and start with OAE, otoacoustic emissions, or OAE screening, which, as we have just said, is the recommended hearing screening for birth to 3-year-old children. Now, you see this depicted here in the photos on your screen. So if you're serving children birth to 3, again, OAE is the one and only evidence-based method that's recommended by the American Academy of Audiology, as well as the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association, also known as ASHA.
OAE screening is the most appropriate method to identify young children at risk for permanent hearing loss because it's accurate, it's feasible, it doesn't require a behavioral response from the child, like raising a hand or dropping something in a bucket, thus allows us to screen children under 3 years of age. It's quick and easy. Most children, once you're trained to do this well, can be screened in a minute or two, sometimes as quick as 30 seconds per ear. It's a flexible tool. And what that means is that we can do it in a variety of environments. Just like you see in this photo here, this little guy is being screened at the snack table. A child can be screened in a variety of settings: classroom, home, even healthcare settings, even while they're asleep.
And most importantly of all, it's effective. It's effective in identifying those children who may have a mild hearing loss or a loss in just one ear, as well as those that have a severe bilateral hearing loss or hearing loss in both ears. Now, in addition, it can be helpful in drawing attention to a broader range of hearing health conditions as well, conditions that may need further medical attention. OAE screening can also help us identify children who have a temporary hearing loss as a result of middle ear infections. Now, although this isn't the primary goal of OAE hearing screening, it's definitely an additional benefit of screening with this method.
Take a good look at these photos. What do you notice here? These children here are all being screened using the OAE method. They aren't being pulled out into a foreign environment that they've never been in before, that's strange to them. They're being screened in everyday educational, home, and healthcare environments, even in an outdoor play environment. And those who are doing the screening are people they already know. They're teachers, home visitors, health specialists who they're acquainted with already. That is part of the beauty of doing OAE screening with these young children.
In fact, the screening works best when children are familiar and comfortable with the adult that's doing the actual screening, and where they can play with a toy, they can be held, or even sleep while the screening is being conducted. Now let's talk about conducting the screening. To conduct an OAE screening, we're first going to take a good look, a thorough look at that outer part of the ear. We want to look in there and make sure that there's no visible sign of infection or blockage. And then a small probe on which a disposable cover has been placed is then inserted into the child's ear canal. And that probe delivers a low volume or quiet sound stimulus into the ear. A cochlea, or the inner snail-shaped portion of the ear, if that's functioning normally, it will respond to this sound by sending a signal to the brain while also producing an acoustic emission. And this emission is analyzed by the screening unit. And in approximately 30 seconds or so, a result will appear either as a pass or a refer. Now, every normal, healthy inner ear produces an emission that can be recorded in this way.
So here you see a child being screened. Let me play this for a minute. This is an actual real-time screening. She's going to put the probe in the ear now. And on a device that you'll see in a moment, it's a little handheld device, she pushed a button to start it. And that indicated they got their pass or refer. And now they're going to do the other ear. It's really nice to have a helper like she has here. There you see the handheld device. And they got another result. Now that applause doesn't necessarily mean that he passed. It just means that they have a result and that he cooperated like they were hoping. You know, like many skillful tasks, competent screeners can make it look so easy. And often it is easy once you've been trained and you've had some practice. To assist screeners in keeping all of the different steps of the screening process in mind, one of the resources you'll find on kidshearing.org is the skills checklist for OAE screening. The checklist guides a screener through the process. It's helpful whenever you're a new screener, or if you're an experienced screener needing a refresher, or if you're a manager and you want to make sure that everybody's doing this by the book. And doing a competency-based observation. So you'll want to check out this screening skills checklist and make sure that none of those steps are being skipped. You know, as we've emphasized, evidence-based screening is more than just using a designated piece of equipment. You have to be trained to use that equipment and to have a screening and follow-up process built around that equipment. You need to use appropriate equipment, of course. So let's talk about that for a moment. You should be aware that OAE equipment is available from several different companies and in models designed specifically for screening that's being done by lay individuals like yourselves. These are, but there are also simpler and these are the simpler and less expensive models. Basic OAE equipment currently costs around $3,800. There are also other equipment models that are intended for audiologists for diagnostic purposes. And these are more complicated and more expensive. You don't need those more expensive ones. As non-audiologists, you want to be careful not to purchase more than you need by just getting the simpler models. Now, in addition to the cost of the equipment, each time you screen someone, there is a disposable probe cover that Terry mentioned that goes over the probe that needs to be inserted snugly into the ear canal. And those come in a variety of sizes to ensure a really snug fit. You'll need a good selection of those. And this is the hard part to hear. They cost like $1 to $1.50 each. I know, gasp. But that is how, and they can't be reused or used on other children. So you'll need to have those. You'll also want to purchase some adult size probe covers. And you're thinking, why? That's because you're going to use those adult size ones when you're learning. You screen yourself and other adults to get comfortable with the process. And you'll also be using the equipment on yourself before you screen children each day you're going to screen, just to make sure that the device is still working properly. So you want to test it on yourself before you go screen children. We recommend you purchase about twice as many probe covers as you have total number of children to be screened, just so that you always have enough on hand. When you meet with an equipment distributor or salesperson, they're most likely going to offer to train you. And that's great. They're going to train you about the equipment, but it's important to understand that the training that they're prepared to offer you is rarely, if ever, the training you really need. It's kind of like going to a car salesman, expecting them to teach you to drive. They're not going to do that. They're going to show you the functions of the car. And the salesman here is going to show you the functions of the equipment, probably more functions than you even need to know. But they're not going to give you training on how to screen children, how to document your results, how to communicate with parents what you're finding, what the follow-up steps should be. So this has been a point of confusion for people, and we want to make it clear. So be sure that you get training, whether it's from the training available through our website or from a local pediatric audiologist or experienced screener. You need somebody who's going to be able to teach you to drive, teach you to screen children under a variety of conditions. So that was an overview of the OAE screening method. Now, let's talk about the Pure Tone screening process for those of you who may be considering this. Now, note that this is never recommended for children under 3. As we mentioned, Pure Tone screening has traditionally been the most common method for children 3 to 5 years of age and older. And you probably recognize this method because you've either already used it or you've had your own hearing screened this way. Now, in this screening procedure, musical note-like tones are presented to children through headphones. And children provide a behavioral response, like raising a hand or dropping a toy in a bucket, to indicate that they heard the tone. Pure Tone screening gives us a good idea of the functioning of the entire auditory system. In fact, all the way to the brain, with the child showing us with a physical or behavioral indication that they perceived the sound. It's a relatively affordable method, with the screening equipment costing between about $800 to $1,000. So it is less expensive than OAE for the initial upfront costs. The equipment is durable and portable, enabling us to easily transport and use it in a variety of locations. And a wide variety of individuals can be trained to perform the Pure Tone screening procedure.
Now, to conduct Pure Tone screening, just like we did with OAE, we're going to first take a look at the ear. We're going to make sure that there's no visible sign of infection or blockage. And then if the ear appears to be normal, then the screener is going to instruct or teach or condition the child how to listen for a tone and then respond by raising their hand or placing a toy in a bucket. This step can take some time because we want to be sure that the child is able to reliably complete the screening task. Then, once the screener has observed that the child is reliably responding to sounds that are presented, just like they were instructed, that's when we'll start the actual screening. Then, during the screening process, this listen and respond game is repeated. It's repeated at least twice at 3 different pitches on each ear. And we note the child's response or their lack of response after each tone is presented. If the child responds appropriately and consistently to that range of tones that are presented to each ear, then the child passes the screening.
2 especially notable ways that Pure Tone screening differs from OAE screening is that the process requires children not only to be cooperative, but to be full participants in the process, following directions and responding reliably. As we mentioned, that means completing an initial process we refer to as conditioning, or teaching children, and carefully determining whether you're getting reliable responses from them before even attempting to screen.
There's one other notable difference between Pure Tone and OAE screening, and that is that the screening itself is not automated like OAE screening is. Instead, pure tone screening, you as the screener manually step through the presentation of each tone multiple times for each ear, and you record each response. And then following a very specific protocol, you as the screener determine whether the ear passed or not. So with pure tone screening, there's considerably more potential for screener error to produce inaccurate results. And hence then there's that need for thorough training and oversight to make sure all the screeners are adhering to the prescribed screening protocol. Now, this is an example here on your screen of the actual screening steps that need to be documented for each ear as you screen. So through the training process, you'll learn all of the steps of the conditioning and the screening process and all of the environmental conditions that we want to monitor and watch and make sure that those are met as you complete a child's screening. Then based on these results, the screener then determines, like I mentioned before, if an ear passes or not. The device itself does not produce that result, as is the case with OAE screening.
You know, that complicated process is one of the reasons why a lot of people are deciding to go with OAE instead. But for those of you who are using this process, we also have a skills checklist here to work through to make sure that each and every step of the screening process is being followed. So you'll want to look at this. Now, as we said early on, one of the last things we want to talk about briefly today is what happens when children don't pass a screening. What then? In order to be evidence-based, your screening process has to include a follow-up protocol for when children don't pass on one or both ears. We have to emphasize that our screening efforts are only as good as our ability to systematically follow up on children who don't pass on one or both ears. So here's a quick snapshot of our screening process. We're going to screen 100% of the children. We expect about 75% will pass on both ears right off the bat. But that leaves about 25% who don't pass that initial screening. What we do with that 25% is we screen them again in 2 weeks, just to see if they'll pass the second time. Maybe they had a fluid in their ear or wax blockage. Maybe there was some screener error. So we screen them again before we refer them to anybody. At that point, we find about 8% still don't pass. And those children are referred to a healthcare provider for a middle ear evaluation. Maybe they have an ear infection that needs to be treated. That's how we get that added benefit of finding some ear infections that nobody's noticing. After they've been treated and cleared by the healthcare provider, we screen that 8% one more time. Most pass at this point, but if they don't, about 1% are referred to an audiologist for a complete audiological evaluation. This is overall what I just went through, and you'll see this in detail on our website and in our training process. But that's the follow-up protocol that you need to use regardless of which method you're using, OAE or pure tone. All right, so I said at the beginning today, the most important thing is you know where to go once we're done with today's webinar, and it's kidshearing.org. So let me review again what you'll find when you go there. And now if you have some questions, you can start posting them in the question and answer box, and we'll respond to them. Note that in a moment, we'll also put up an evaluation in the chat box so that you can complete the evaluation before heading off today and get your certificate of attendance for today's webinar. So again, our website is right here. The first group of resources are all about planning for evidence-based screening, getting the big picture, resources about that, where to find a local audiologist to help you with your screening and training process. Who are you going to refer children to? How can you get some help? Maybe after you do the training, one of the really good things to do is to have an audiologist come and spend an hour with you and watch you screen and give you some pointers of what they're observing. There's equipment resources here about how to select equipment. You'll find it for OAE and Pure Tone screening equipment. The next group of resources is how to find that online training we've been referring to, whether for OAE or Pure Tone audiometry. And the next group of resources are all the daily use resources, getting ready to screen. What do I need to have each day I'm going to screen? There's a checklist for getting ready to screen. There are letters to parents introducing your screening program, letters you could send to healthcare providers or a local audiologist about what you're doing at your program and the fact that you may be referring children to them. If you want a good review of the protocol I just went over really quickly, you'll find that here under protocol guides. And then forms for documenting your results. The forms that we have developed follow the protocol exactly. So you don't really need to remember the protocol. If you use the forms, it'll guide you to the next step through completion of the screening process. And then letters for referring parents to healthcare providers or audiologists are available there in both English and Spanish. Last, you'll find a tracking tool for tracking a group of children through the screening process as well. And then other resources in our archives are available. For those of you in Head Start, remember the Head Start Center, Technical Assistance Center is available also. So remember, they've got some resources related to hearing screening. They're another link back to us as well. So you may not have ever thought of it quite like this, but monitoring the status of a child's hearing is central to quality early childhood programs that are committed to language development and school readiness. When children with hearing loss are identified and connected with the intervention resources that they need, they can thrive. And you can have the satisfaction of knowing that you were really a part of that outcome. And that outcome literally lasts a lifetime. So this is not a vague contribution that you're making to their lives. This is a very tangible, lifelong outcome that you are helping them to achieve. So in our final minutes here, what questions do you have? And remember again, this webinar has been recorded, and that means that we're going to post it on kidshearing.org and infanthearing.org in the next couple of days, so you can review it again or share it with those who haven't attended live with us today. So a question for those of us who have been trained on how to conduct OAE screeners, are we able to train others on how to use it? Or is it required that they also be certified? So that's really up to you. I mean, of course, we know that telephone game where I can say one thing and pass it to the next person and then pass it to the next person. And by the time you get around the table, the message has changed. So I would encourage everybody to hear the original message, but the really great thing about having those of you who have already been trained there available is that you can go do the practice exercises with them, go screen with them, and give them helpful hints along the way. But there are no standardized requirements about who is certified and who is not, unless your state has specific requirements, which is always good to check. But I would employ those of you with more experience as models for those, but not necessarily trainers. The next question is, what do you do with children who do not cooperate? What is the example of a backup plan? So I can say quickly that for Pure Tone screening, the backup plan is to do an OAE yourself or refer the child to an audiologist. You can always have somebody else. If you have multiple staff who can do the screening, maybe somebody else will just have a better rapport with the child and be able to be effective. So don't hesitate to swap in and out and tap each other out if one of you just isn't registering with a given child. That happens to all of us. And that's true with OAE screening or pure tone screening as well. During the training, you'll see lots of strategies, particularly around OAE screening, for being able to try it under different conditions, using different toys to distract children. Those are what we would call backup plans. And with OAE screening, never forget that screening while a child is asleep is always an option. The next question, when using OAE screening, does it have to be completely quiet? Terry, do you want to respond to that? Terry?
Thank you. That's a great question. If you recall earlier in the presentation, we showed some photos of children being screened in really natural environments like the snack table. And that's one of the beauties of OAE hearing screening, is that it is a method that can be done with some background noise present. And so I would take advantage of that and try to screen kids. The environment does not have to be absolutely quiet.
Since we are at the top of the hour, Gunnar, can you post the link for the evaluation for those folks that need to go on? Thank you, Gunnar. We'll continue to answer some of these questions that you've got here. And Paula, if you need to run as our captioner, we totally understand. We'll continue to wrap up here in the next few minutes. Let's see. Many times, I'm going to try to ask the questions that are not about specifically screening children, because this is really an introductory training, introduction, not a training. Let's see. Does a physical examination of the ear by the PCP count as evidence-based hearing screening? The answer is no, it is not. Not unless that PCP is actually implementing an evidence-based hearing screening. So if they're birth to 3 and you don't see an OAE screening method having been documented and ear-specific results, you would never want to assume that their ears had been screened. So we always say, don't assume unless you see method-specific, ear-specific results. The next question, would we ever need to use a tympanometer during our hearing screening process? Terry, do you want to talk briefly about how that comes into play during the middle ear evaluation?
Yeah, so for reference, a TIMP or tympanometry is a test that's used to assess solely middle ear function. However, and some programs have elected to include that. However, as we talked about earlier in the presentation, one of the side benefits really of OAE screening is that typically, if a child has a fluid-filled middle ear, they will probably refer. If you follow through our referral protocol and we make that medical or that referral for medical evaluation, and in most cases, that's when that middle ear disorder is addressed. So it's not necessary to add that step in, and it can, but it's a useful tool in the diagnostic process.
The next question is, if I'm understanding correctly, is it acceptable to use OAEs on all children birth to 5? And this is, you do need to consult with your health services advisory committee if you're a Head Start program. There are different points of view about this question within the audiological community itself. Many people are going with a yes to that question. You do also want to check any guidelines at your state level. From us at the ECHO Initiative, we encourage people to consider that option. And again, look at the document on kidshearing.org that explains the two and compares them and the considerations that need to be made between those two methods. But that is really a choice that people are making at the programmatic level. The next question, how do we get newborn hearing screening results? That should be a part of the child's health record. And so you can ask that as a part of the child's health record. Terry, anything to add about that?
You can also contact the state newborn hearing screening program, and they should be able to help facilitate getting those records if you don't know which facility that screening occurred.
The way you can find that is on our website. If you go into that first group of resources where it says find an audiologist, you click there and you'll find your state's newborn hearing screening program. Somebody says, I have a parent who was concerned about whether the OAE would affect PE tube placement when the probe is inserted. Terry.
Yes, not at all. That's a great question. It's really appropriate to go ahead and screen with OAEs. That PE tube is placed at the level of the eardrum, and the probe is not, the probe is made to not go in that far. And an open functioning PE tube, we should expect a normal passing result if that child has normal hearing.
So we have a question here that for virtual early intervention evaluation, the state is using the HEAR checklist. So when do we recommend a referral for an audiological evaluation? Well, we would say that that's not a hearing screening, that the only recommended screening of children is a physiologic screening. And so we would recommend that any child who is being considered for early intervention services, especially if it's related to speech or language, have a complete audiological evaluation or at least a physiologic hearing screening, which is an OAE screening in the case of early intervention. Terry, anything to add about that?
No, I think that's exactly right. The actual hearing system has never been screened in that case.
So let's see what this question says. The Child Health Report for Pennsylvania has a check mark that says, has the child received all age-appropriate screenings listed in the routine preventive healthcare services currently recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics? Yes or no with a check mark. If this is checked yes, shouldn't we assume that the hearing screening was done according to standards? It also has a place next to it for vision. Okay, so the American Academy of Pediatrics Bright Futures guidelines do not specify a physiologic screening after the newborn period until 4 years of age. Now, we have been working with them to update that. But that pretty much means, that they may or may not have had a hearing screening. Most likely, they have not had a physiologic hearing screening. So, each program can abide by whatever guidelines they want. But the American Academy of Pediatric guidelines were set forward for what pediatricians would be doing in their visits with families. Now, they don't see children every day or as often as many early childhood providers do. If they did, you can bet that those requirements would include a hearing screening somewhere along the way during those first 4 years of life. And so remember that those guidelines are minimum standards for pediatricians. They're not to be interpreted necessarily for those of us who see children on a regular basis. So we encourage you to do as much as you can to monitor hearing screening, not as little as you're required. Anything to add to that, Terry?
No, I think you well covered that.
We are 10 minutes after the hour and the questions keep coming in. If there's anything that you don't find your answers to by looking at our website, kidshearing.org, feel free to text us or email us, through our website, and we'll get back to you with an answer to your questions. Terry, thank you for your time today. Thank you again to our captioner and to our technical support folks, and to all of you for all you're doing to do right by the children and families in your program to make sure that children have the best possible opportunity to thrive by always having access to language, regardless of whether they have some degree of hearing loss or not. Remember, kidshearing.org, go there soon, go there often. You'll find lots of useful tools there. Thank you. Oh, and click on the survey and certificate generator in the chat box before you go back to whatever you're doing.